I want to talk about the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which was signed by Donald J. Trump, the president. How does that happen?
That happened. That's a hole he dug for himself. To get into the club, you have to be compromised. There's compromise on everybody, and that's the rule of the game.
If impeachment doesn't happen, do we see that Trump could face a major defeat at the upcoming midterm in November?
I think he will be humiliated. Most people, I think he will be humiliated in the midterms. Everyone recognizes that Europe acts as a vassal of the U.S. That wasn't the case. A year and a half ago, Macron came out and said it when he was coming back from China. And he said, we must have strategic autonomy coming out of these files that show that Maxwell may have been eliminated by Mossad.
Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Peter Isaacson. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Fair Observer. Today we're going to talk about the recently released Jeffrey Epstein Files. Peter, right off the bat, what do we know about this?
What do we know? Well, we know more and more every day. The quality of what we know is difficult to determine because we've got a mountain of evidence, and the evidence is what people say or have said to each other, principally in emails. There are some interesting video documents as well, and other tidbits that are worth analyzing. And we've got an army of people particularly on independent media, who are looking at all these things, and each of them has their own angle and their own interest in certain things and their own ability to follow things up. So we're getting more and more all the time. Anything we say today will be not contradicted tomorrow, but added to. And this is likely to go on not just for days, but weeks and possibly months and maybe even longer. Plus, we're waiting. We've got about half of what they say the files contain. So I think 3.5 million pages have been released, and there are about 3 million more to be released. And then you can speculate about whether the 3 million that haven't been released are more damaging and damning than the ones we can see now, which leads to a lot of interest and a lot of activity. So it's keeping people busy, and it's really interesting. We're learning a lot, not just about Epstein and the people he knew, but we're learning about the world we live in and how it's structured. And this is what interests me the most, because Epstein himself is a character we pretty much knew what kind of person he was and what kind of things he was interested in and what kind of things he could be taken to court about. But we also suspected, or were allowed to know, that had something to do as well with spycraft and intelligence. And we didn't know who, where, how, and when. So some of that is coming out now. But I think there's a lot. What's interesting is that you're getting different people, lots of different people having takes on what they're finding and their interpretation of it. And when you look at all that as a conglomerate of new information, it really gives you the ability to start using it like a jigsaw puzzle. And in this case, it's a jigsaw puzzle where we're starting to get a sense of what's in the middle and then how the frame is worked, the way you do a jigsaw puzzle. You're going to do the frame first, and then you start getting patches of things that fit together. And that's what we're seeing now. So it's really interesting. It's going to keep us busy. Not that
Absolutely, Peter. I mean, just the volume of what's been released is massive. I mean, you give us a ballpark figure, 3.2 million files, but these include 1,000 images. It has emails of Jeffrey Epstein writing to about more than 1,000 people. It's also got testimonies that victims have given to the FBI, and it's, I mean, there's still so much to be dug out, and as you said rightfully, that independent media is on it. They are doing it. But I want to talk about, and I want you, because you were born in America, you grew up in America, now you're in France. So you've got, and you've been in America for a long time. So I want you to give us an understanding of how this happened. And I want to talk about the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which was signed by Donald J. Trump, the president. How does that happen?
That happened. That's a hole he dug for himself, because one of the key elements of his campaign for his second term was that he would be transparent about all the big things that worried people, all the mysteries, starting with the JFK assassination, the MLK assassination, the Bobby Kennedy assassination. But he also promised specifically, and that's kind of surprised people because everyone knew that he was implicated. He promised to deal with the Epstein case, which he knew had so much salacious content to it that people would listen to it and say, "Well, we will, get to see this pornography at some point." So it was a way of attracting people, and it was a way of underlining his image of the one who would challenge the deep state, uncover what everyone else was hiding. And that was just his image. I mean, that was a calculation based on the idea that he was credible as someone who could shake things up and reveal truths that had been hidden. So he won on that basis. I mean, he got a lot of people convinced, yes, if we vote for him, all these things that have been kept secret and we're not allowed to know, and these policies we don't understand, including foreign policy that's going in directions that nobody wants. And we've got wars and we've got problems we can't solve. He's going to clear the path. He's going to push all the obstacles out of the way and make it happen. So that was his image. And then he made a big mistake because, like many people who have succeeded, and this is very American, once you've succeeded and once you've got means, and he has financial means, he had political means, you think, well, now I'm protected. I can cover myself. I've made things, I've done something that people might not like, but it doesn't matter. I'll just push it out of the way and we'll talk about other things. And that's where he had that notorious meeting, I would say, when the question came up. I think it was a journalist who asked it while his whole cabinet was there. And they said, what about the Epstein files? And that's where he said, oh, Epstein, are we still talking about that? That's old business. Yeah. And that clearly upset his following, his electorate. Let's say 60% of his electorate, because the extremely faithful Trumpians who will excuse anything he does. And so that explains why he's now in trouble with this. And now we're trying to read what his strategy is, because he ended up releasing the files under pressure, because it was Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna, I think, who pushed that legislation through. So he had to do it, and all these things are coming out, and nobody knows how. I mean, it's just chaos. Nobody knows how you construct a defense against the kinds of things that don't look good for you. And this is true, not just of Trump, but all the other people involved. Yeah,
absolutely. That's what I was going to bring up next, because it's not just Trump. In fact, it's a lot of people from his cabinet who have been named. Howard Lutnick has been named.
Yeah, and he's a serious case.
Yes. In fact, his emails are still being talked about, the way he was talking about arranging a visit to the Epstein Island. But it's more than just that. Of course, you told us about Bill Clinton, but then the files also name people like Bill Gates. They also name some of the biggest businessmen that are on the planet. So it looks like everyone's compromised.
Well, they are, and I would follow the analysis of Simon Dixon on this, who does a lot of work on it. I don't know if people know Simon Dixon, but he's more a specialist of Bitcoin than
Hmm.
of geopolitics or politics itself. But I very much adhere to his analysis, which is that, not of the whole thing, but on this point, that what this is about is a system in which people join or achieve status within a very exclusive club, the club of influential, wealthy people who have a hand on some lever of power. They have things, important things to do and to defend within a very amorphous power structure. But it's not so much a cabal or a system of control. It's a system it's a club. I mean, it's to use, if you know the George Carlin line, it's a big club.
Hmm.
And he talks about all these horrible people who run our government and our society, and you ain't in it. Yeah. Uh, and that's what we're seeing, that people in finance, people in business, politics, obviously, intelligence, all these people are not necessarily uh, in some kind of formal complicity, but they all feel that they belong to the same club. And what Simon Dixon says, which is original, he says, to get into the club, you have to be compromised. There's compromat on everybody, and that's the rule of the game. That's where he's even different from people like Whitney Webb, who's written books about Jeffrey Epstein. And that is what he's saying, is that not so much that it's blackmail, where everyone's talking about Jeffrey Epstein's blackmail ring or the blackmail system, where he would take pictures of these people or do video of them doing compromising things. And then the idea is that if you do that, then you've got leverage over these people and you can shake them down. You can get money or you can get anything you want from them. What he's saying is that's not the way it works. What happens is that you belong to a club in which you have to accept being compromised. And he says that the more compromised you are, the higher you can rise in the hierarchy.
Hmm.
But what it is that everyone respects everyone else because they know that everyone is compromised.
Right.
And that means that nobody is going to talk. And there's this wonderful document. I don't know if this wasn't in the files themselves, but one of the people who's been exposed is Peter Attia. The I guess I didn't know who he was, but he's
Hmm.
a physical culture guru or something. And I speak in total ignorance. What I do know is that he said something that appeared in one of the emails where he said the problem with you, Jeffrey, is that you have such an unconventional or obscene, outrageous lifestyle that I can't talk about it. And that really tells us that what this kind of mentality is, that you belong to a club, you are compromised, and you can be compromised. You don't have to worry about things because you
Hmm.
know that everyone else is compromised. So nobody would dare, none of the people who know and who respect each other will rat on those who on you or anyone else. So you're all protected by the fact that you're all compromised, and that creates a, when you think about it, and I hope psychologists can weigh in on this. It makes a lot of sense because these are people who do have power, wealth, resources. They all have armies of lawyers and consultants and accountants who are, yeah, it's like a defense network around them. So even when something emerges which seems a bit compromising, it
Hmm.
will easily be tamped down. So these are people who live in a certain state of security and intoxication as well with the power and the fact that it's not their power, it's the shared power of their entire club. Uh, and they're just happy to be part of it. And then they maneuver amongst themselves, of course. Uh, and then if you accept that kind of, I would call it sociological analysis, then you can look at what Simon Dixon is saying and understand that it makes sense that people that, that, that people in different who have different functions see that as a complementary system where you've got the finance people doing one thing, the political people doing another thing, the intelligence people, uh, and everyone's kind of working together. And from time to time, some people may be sacrificed because they're too exposed or because it's convenient to get rid of them.
Hmm.
And there's some people that say that Epstein reached the point where it was necessary to get rid of him. And the same thing with Robert Maxwell.
Hmm.
And we now have quite a number of circumstantial pieces of evidence that show, which came out of which are coming out of these files, that show that
Right.
Maxwell may have been eliminated by Mossad. So
Hmm.
that's a credible theory.
All right. Okay, I want to talk a little bit. I want to digress from here and talk about still talk about the files. I want to know why have has so much information been redacted? What do you think is the theory behind that?
Well, if you give someone the power to redact, I mean, the deep state, it's the deep state who's supplying all this. This is in contradiction with the law because I
Hmm.
think the law says that was drafted by Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey said that redaction could only be conducted in very limited conditions.
Yes. It was
Um,
so. What the Transparency Act said that redaction is permitted, but it will only be applied to really gruesome acts that are documented in the files. But here
yeah,
we also see that names have been redacted, which is
yeah,
strange
but
because that's that's against the Transparency Act.
if you're part of the deep state and you're in charge of releasing files like this, the power you have is the power to redact. You use
Hmm.
that power.
Hmm.
So people will complain. I mean, this is how the whole system works. You're always pushing to the limit for two reasons. One is to show that you have power and to make sure that people understand that you're using your power. They can complain about it, and maybe you do have to back off at some point.
Hmm.
But it's a strategy game that's going on all the time, and depending on what your role is, if your role is to account for documents, that's one thing. If it's to create compromising evidence on people, because that may have been precisely what Jeffrey Epstein's role was, which people were aware of in the system. That he played a functional role in a system that required the compromat that we talked about. So if whatever your task is, your assigned task, it's not assigned by someone, it's assigned by the logic of the system. Whatever it is, you need to push forward and show people that you're doing your job in excess of what your supposed rights and responsibilities are. So for me, it's logical that they would redact as much as possible, and partly just to show that they're doing more than just obeying the law, because that's what these people don't do. They have to show to what extent they are beyond the law. And this is the culture. The culture is, we are a group of people, a club, that enforce the law. Thanks to us, we have this system that works, and it produces wealth. It produces governance. It produces an order that allows us to say we have a civilization. So they consider that they've done that. Now they have to show that to respect them, people have to understand that they are above the law. Now, they won't say this. This is not a description, a formal description of the system. It's not the constitution of the club. What it is the reality is that that's how it works. It's the way the mafia works as well. It's the same kind of system, and it produces the same effects of omerta, where nobody will denounce anyone else.
So, what would it take for the redactions to be made public?
Well, it would take political organization, which is impossible to achieve. So you've got a rogue Republican and a rogue Democrat, Massey and Kana, stepping forward and pushing in that direction. Can they bring their parties with them? No. Could they mount an operation in Congress that it would really be the equivalent of an impeachment, but it wouldn't be impeaching the president. It would be impeaching whoever's responsible for doing these things. But there are other ways, I think, of getting around. I'm not an expert in this. There are ways of getting to a state where you can unredact certain documents, but not the whole thing.
Right. Peter, I want to talk about something very interesting that I've observed about the Epstein files. So I'm speaking to you, you're in France, I'm in India, and everything that I've seen, read, and learned about the Epstein files has come on my phone, on social media. But when I do Google searches of the major mainstream media organizations, I'm seeing very different patterns. When I look at when I look at the top media houses in the US, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Fox News, the front page doesn't have anything about Epstein files. But then I look at UK and I look at Guardian, which is supposedly on the left. Then I look at the Mirror, which is on the right. Then I look at BBC, and the front page is full of mentions about the Epstein files, and they're naming everybody, and they're calling out everybody. Then I look at Al Jazeera, again, there's nothing. I look at East Asia and the big firms in East Asia, again, nothing. In India as well, the big organizations, the big media in India is not talking about the Indian politicians and the Indian businessmen who are named in the Epstein files. This really baffles me. Why do you think this is happening? How come major media houses in the US are not talking about this?
I think there are a number of reasons that they will end up talking about it, but I think they're a little bit diffident at the moment because they don't know how to do it, and they work on the basis of a pretty stable editorial policy about parties and personalities. So there are things that they officially decide, um, and others that they simply tacitly follow, about what you should be talking about, especially anything that's somewhat scandalous. Um, I think they're caught a little bit unprepared because there's been so much that's released which
Hmm.
they don't have the means to account for in a responsible way. And they like to do things in ways that seem responsible.
Hmm.
They aren't necessarily responsible, but they seem responsible. So they don't want to stick their neck out and say and highlight things that may be contradictory with their stable editorial policy, or contradictory with the truth, because there, in everything we're seeing, there's a lot of interesting facts, because they are facts to the extent that we're having what people are saying as a fact. Now, whether there's any truth behind what they're saying is another problem, but these are authentic expressions. So how do you filter out facts from that? But the other thing is that I think they don't know how this correlates with their editorial policies. I wrote a couple of columns back in, I think, 2019 about the New York Times and Russiagate,
Hmm.
and that was when it came out and this was confidential, I guess, because it was a private editorial meeting when Dean Baquet, um, who was the head of the New York Times editorial board, um, admitted that they had been running with the Russiagate story because they thought it was a good, attractive thing to do. And that meant they weren't fact checking it. They weren't critiquing it. They weren't putting it in any kind of journalistic perspective. So
Hmm.
that's what these big media do. They have to stick to a policy and an image that they've created about what kind of information they're transmitting, what kind of ideas they're willing to put forward. And this is so confusing. I mean, everything that's coming out, given the, the personalities involved and the interests that they represent, this is all so confusing that I think they're having trouble reacting. But they will try to find a way of doing it somewhere along the line, I
Hmm.
expect. Many of them, I think, one of the things we can see in media is that if something embarrassing comes up in the news that you don't want to talk about, um, you can work on the hope that it's going to fade away and people will no longer be interested in 3 days time or 3 weeks time. So you just keep quiet as long as possible. But when it reemerges later, then you've got to react in some way.
Right. So I want to know how things are in Europe. I mean, I know you're in France, but in the UK, it's a different game in the United Kingdom. I mean, there's a high possibility that um, there could be a major shift in the government because there's so much pressure on Keir Starmer, and not just him, even the royal family is facing the heat, um,
Yeah,
and not
they
just in the
are.
UK, in Norway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the problem with Epstein, is that he had friends in many different places. So depending on how sensitive it is locally,
Mhm.
or how sensational it is, and how the media treats sensational news, because that's what I was saying. That you have an editorial policy. It's not just about politics or serious issues. Let's say it's also about what kind of sensationalism, uh, in the realm of people, press, and that kind of thing, you think will attract readers. And I think royalty is always good, actually. The tradition in Europe, and especially Northern Europe, of taking an interest in the scandals of, or the potential scandals of royalty, that's been going on for a long time. So that's why I think when it's royals, there's no problem because they're supposedly not political. So you can, depending on your readership, if you have a readership that's interested in that kind of thing, you're going to exploit it. On the political side, it's a little bit different. So you could wonder about why you're saying that I haven't been following this. I haven't been trying to see which of the big media titles have covered this in different ways. But you're saying the Guardian has been pretty sensational in its
Yes, the
linking
Guardian, BBC,
Starmer.
Mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Guardian and Mirror are both left of sorts, and you would expect that they would want to defend the Labour Party. But I don't. Starmer was already not popular, and for other reasons. I mean, none of the leaders we have in Europe are popular these days. Fortunately for Macron, there's no direct connection with Epstein, but we've had a big scandal here because of Jacques Lang, who a former minister, Mitterrandist minister. So he's a socialist, and he's a prominent personality. So that's created a scandal here. But there's so much scandal about how the government is running. And added to that, the whole drama of Europe itself, which has lost its bearings completely and is struggling with a basic identity problem. Does Europe have an identity? And if it does, where does it lie? Does it lie in Brussels? That is it the Union? Or is it in each of the nations? Or is it the tradition of the continent? And where does Britain fit in that? And of course, where does the US fit into it? Because everyone now recognizes, and this has really become a major talking point. Everyone recognizes that Europe acts as a vassal of the US. That wasn't the case a year and a half ago. Macron came out and said it when he was coming back from China, and he said we must have strategic autonomy. And we must not allow ourselves to become a vassal of the U.S. And that created a lot of frictions. He's impertinent to say that. We're all part of NATO. We've all got a mission with Ukraine. We shouldn't even be thinking about what China's impact could have on us. So that was toned down. But now everyone recognizes it because of Trump and because of the friction between Trump and Europe, and the way the whole Ukraine situation is playing out. There's this feeling we've been betrayed by our not just our ally, but our feudal lord, our feudal master. So what do? Do you revolt? No, you can't revolt. Do you complain? Yes, and you flatter at the same time.
Right.
But there's also this other aspect of this problem, and that is that people are wondering about things that have been discussed over the last 8 years, and that was after the first Trump term, a 4-year term, from 2017 to 2021, people in Europe would say, "Oh, this wasn't very comfortable. We don't feel comfortable. We don't like this situation." But now we've got John. We will have. People were saying back in 2020, but shortly the Democrats will come back, and we can forget about Trump and get back to normality.
Hmm.
and uh, and that actually made Europeans even more to act more like vassals than before Trump, because they felt relieved. They felt there was a sense that, well, now we can do things that we agree on, and we can discuss them behind closed doors and work out everything that we share with in terms of values, in terms of principles, in terms of ideas of democracy and all that with the U.S. But then Trump comes back
Yeah.
and with a vengeance, and it's now impossible for Europeans to say, well, and there is serious talk on this level. I mean, it's no longer backroom chatter. It's up front. There's talk about, well, do we have to recognize now that the U.S. has changed? That whether Trump is there or somebody else, and we don't know who that might be. It might be J.D. Vance. It could be a Democrat. Who knows? Uh,
Hmm.
it's not going to change. That's not. We've crossed the Rubicon. So, but they can't say that with any sense of certainty, and there is no way of having a unified European discussion about it. So this is total confusion in Europe. What the media are doing and how they're reacting to the Epstein files
Right.
doesn't surprise me. That it makes no sense, or it makes sense because anything that attracts readers, and some people can say that in some media they can say, well, this is a story that will attract readers, let's run with it. But what I'm saying is that the idea of managing a stable editorial policy is more and more difficult for the media.
Peter, so let's end this with Donald Trump. I mean,
We,
he's clearly dug a grave for himself. But why aren't Americans out on the street? Why aren't they protesting? I mean, you've got the sitting president named in these Epstein files, allegedly doing heinous acts. Why is the ordinary American silent on this?
because there is no ordinary American. Americans are individuals, and this has always been the basis of U.S. society, is that you encourage the belief in you as an individual,
Hmm.
and uh, so that atomizes society. Everyone, but it used to be that you could collect together in groups and have have a collective opinion and a collective purpose and cause. Uh, so we had protests against the war in Vietnam. I was part of that.
Hmm.
We had protests even against the war in the invasion of Iraq. Uh, but they had, in the 60s, it actually had serious impact, and it was society. It, it covered, the complete society. It actually, you had you had the conflict of rationalized, reasoned positions. But now everyone has their own individual position, and this is part of wokeism, actually.
Mm.
Wokeism has produced the idea that you can group together, but only about a very personal identity question. So you don't group together about issues, serious issues, political issues, and civilizational issues. You group together about your your individuality, your identity, and that has I think eviscerated the the ability of Americans to come together and say, we don't believe in this, or we don't exist to put forward this idea of ourselves or this image of ourselves. We have to change things. you can't get people together to do that. You can get small groups of people together, and you can get protests against ICE, but you can't
Hmm.
get protests against Trump. Uh, and Trump has been very clever in many ways because he's designed things in such a way that he doesn't represent an ideology. He represents uh, he represents a member of that club, of the
Hmm.
club, which nobody knows. Nobody knows how it works or who's in it, and how they arrange things amongst themselves. So I think there are. I don't want to play the sociologist, but I think there are a lot of strands about the way things have been going in the U.S. society, how the media works, how politics has worked, how lobbies have influenced everything. Um, it makes it really impossible, I think, today to have any kind of movement that has a sense of its moral purpose.
Hmm. Peter, what if I asked you to look in and do some crystal ball gazing, but not too far, just till the midterm? Do you think there's a high possibility that Donald Trump could get impeached because of the Epstein files?
That's a good question. I mean, logically, he should be impeached because not just
Hmm.
because of the Epstein file, and logically, given that he's alienated a lot of his own electorate,
Hmm.
that should be possible this time around, whereas it wasn't the first time around. But I think all the failures with impeachment in Trump's first term will make it impossible for that kind of movement even to exist because the Democrats won't be united, and they won't know why they should be united. The Democrats, yeah, we talked about this at the beginning. The Democrats have their own interest in keeping the Epstein files under wrap or
Hmm.
under control. Uh, yeah, you could say that when you look at it from the media perspective and the way Americans have been conditioned to think about the Epstein files, there are two figures, the two emblematic figures that you focus on. One is Trump because he was Epstein's best friend for some time, and the other is Clinton. So you've got the
Hmm.
Republican and the Democrat, and that means that both parties are embarrassed by whatever comes out. They don't want it to be examined in detail. They don't mind if you draw some conclusions and then the thing goes away, but it's not going away. But at the same time, you're not going to provide fuel for either of the movements. If you say the Reds or the Blues, the Democrats, the Republicans, the Conservatives, the Liberals, however you want to break it down, they're not going to they're not going to square off and combat each other. And impeachment is a form of political combat.
Right. So if impeachment doesn't happen, do we see that Trump could face a major defeat at the upcoming midterm in November?
I think he will be humiliated. Most people, I think he will be humiliated in the midterms. Uh, what that means is very difficult. Trying to predict what could possibly happen after that is extremely difficult because he will still be the president. He will
Hmm.
still have the same personality. Now, maybe his physical condition will deteriorate in the meantime. Some people are speculating about that, like
Mhm.
the Biden story. But um, most people think that he will be humiliated. He will not be able to claim to have the same political base he had before. But will that push him towards being a pure fascist rather than a democratic fascist, which a lot of people would say he is today? He's a fascist using democratic tools to the extent that you can do that. Can you go to pure fascism? But to do that, you would have to be very you would have to have a really unified movement,
Hmm.
which of course Hitler had, Mussolini had, but you can't say that Trump has that. So it's a very confusing situation. It's going to be even more confusing. Uh, the Democrats don't have the kind of unity or sense of purpose that could inspire people, the electorate, to say, yes, this is what we want.
Hmm.
Let's back what they're doing. And that means when I speak about the electorate, I'm also speaking about the media. The media won't know how to handle it.
Hmm.
And we have a very cowardly media today. It has no sense of its own purpose. Uh, so anything that happens will probably happen in independent media and on social media. But that's impossible to predict.
Right. That note, Peter, thank you for speaking to me and for chalking out what's happened, because there's not enough chatter about this. That's what I personally believe. It's only on social media, and you leave social media, and there's not much digging out that's happening on the Epstein files. So thank you again for doing this.
Well, thank you, Rohan. And we'll pick up the discussion later on because it's an ongoing story.
Absolutely, we might have to do a part two of this. Of course, part three if you consider our first conversation on
Yeah.
Epstein.
Okay, it was a pleasure being here with you, Rohan, and see you soon.
Same here, Peter.
Bye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.